Question 2 of this paper. Let's get it into focus. Right, here we go. Starts on page 8. The second question of section A. Again, you start with a source-based question. 2 marks. Spend 30 seconds to 1 minute. What does source A show you about the treatment of black Americans in the 1950s? It clearly shows you they were treated unfairly. Segregation in cafes and shops. You know this was in the Deep South. They couldn't use the same facilities as white Americans. And that they were treated in an unfair manner through segregation in the southern states. Describe the work of the NAACP, the National Association of the Advancement for Coloured People. To get 4 marks, you've got to give a detailed description that's accurate. Remember, describe is the key word. They worked to end racism and achieve racial equality by non-violent means. They used proper legal channels and the law courts to challenge segregation and racial discrimination. Their work was quite pioneering and adventurous for the time, but many black people in the early 20th century feared being part of the NAACP because of the backlash from their white owners or white employers. The next question is about using 2 sources and your own knowledge to explain an answer. To explain why some black Americans changed their methods of protesting by the late 1960s. 6 marks. You have to explain using the sources and your own knowledge. Not one or the other again, you've got to combine both. Source B is a speech by Martin Luther King in 1963. We must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. We must conduct our struggle with dignity and discipline and not allow our protests to become violent. And source C of the Black Panther movement, Black Power movement, the paramilitary wing of the Black American protest movement of the late 1960s, influenced by Malcolm X, for example. So, the best answer will refer to both. Simply include these points. Compare Martin Luther King's non-violent approach, his Christian approach, the call for passive resistance, and more direct with more direct violent methods of the black militants, such as the Black Panthers. Black Americans were frustrated at the slow pace of change. They rejected Christianity, God and the Christian faith, since the slave trade had not given them freedom or advanced their cause, or helped them in any way. They still felt enslaved within America. Therefore they rejected what the white man stood for. Many became attracted to the Black Nation of Islam, and they advocated race war and separatism. That means a black state, separate from white America. The Black Panther movement also appealed to young black Americans who were marginalised. That means they felt they didn't have a place in society, didn't have equal opportunities and equal job opportunities, and could not have access to education like many white Americans. Many black Americans felt there had not been enough change since the 1950s and the Civil Rights Movement, and especially since the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Act of 1965. They hadn't seen in the latter part of the 1960s much change or rapid progress being made. Therefore, they changed their protests to more violent protests, such as riots, use of violence, the black paramilitary wing, the Black Panthers, fighting for the cause. Almost a form of gangsterism. So you would compare the sources. You could compare that Martin Luther King made lots of speeches and asked for people to forgive, forget and move on and unite together for civil rights, whereas the Black Panther movement photographed shows they were separatists that had grown tired of the peaceful protest. Use source B and C and your own knowledge to explain why some black Americans changed their methods of protesting by late 1960s. We've just done that one. Let's move on. Apologies. Oh, what have I done? There you go. Why was the Second World War a turning point for black Americans? It's always good when you get the question turning point, because I believe that you're strong on this. A turning point is a change in direction. Usually, in this topic, it's about progress. So, you need a detailed and accurate explanation. Why, the keyword of why, and turning point means you have to explain the turning point. Make a reasoned judgment and evaluation. You have to provide an analysis of the key issue that war was a turning point. It definitely was. It contributed to black Americans gaining more independence and economic independence at home. On the home front, they showed that they were committed, patriotic and American, and that they should be treated as equal to white citizens and should not be treated as second-class citizens. Therefore, they had a chance to prosper during the war, and many were given job opportunities because of a shortage of labour that they wouldn't have been afforded prior to the Second World War. They made contribution during the war as well, fighting in Europe. In Britain, for example, the British soldiers and population couldn't believe how black Americans were treated as second-class citizens and couldn't really understand what was going on in America. We were fighting Nazism, led by Hitler, in Europe, and how could the Americans be oppressing their own people? So this added value to their cause. Also, President Truman was able to get legislation through the Congress, even though Dixiecrats, that were Democrats who were from the southern states of America, opposed him because of the heroic actions of black people during the war in playing their part. This meant that segregation in the armed forces was abolished by 1948 and the American Army became the most integrated part of American society. It was truly a multicultural organisation. This was pioneering by 1948. The Navy and the RAF soon followed. Remember, the Tuskegee Airmen became heroes, fighter pilots. Before the Second World War, black Americans were seen as not being intelligent enough to fly warplanes. Now they were fighter pilots, showing that they had as much skill and endeavour to be great as any white American. Fighting in segregated battalions, the Jim Crow Army, they showed their bravery at the Battle of the Bulge during the Second World War, and this was a turning point. Many white Americans saw black Americans as their brothers because they had shown a great aptitude and heroic nature during the Second World War. They also became politicised, their own black identity, and stirred up their consciousness. How can we be treated as second-class citizens when we are war heroes? We have played our part for the United States of America, fighting fascism, fighting Nazism, fighting racism in Europe and prejudice. How can we come back and settle for that in our own country? And this meant that NAACP, the National Association of the Advancement of Coloured People, that their membership rose from 50,000 to just under 500,000, 450,000. This was quite a turning point, therefore, because it showed that it stirred up emotions within black America to fight further for their cause. This led on to the civil rights movements of the 1950s, the fight against public transport by Rosa Parks, and against changing the education system, the Brown v. Topeka Board of Education, and the Little Rock Nine, and the Freedom Fighters, for example, the Freedom Riders, sorry. So it led the way for reform through rebellion and protest in the 1950s. Black America grew in confidence thanks to the Second World War and the part they played.